I'd just like to do my own acknowledgement, and that's to acknowledge all the First Nations people on the lands across which we work. And we acknowledge the richness, diversity, and sophistication of First Nations people. We acknowledge with sorrow the wrongs of the past that have been taken place and continue to today. We pay deepest respects to elders past, present, and honour the strong leadership that is evident in the emerging elders of tomorrow. We hope to partner together and to work to build a more just and compassionate society for the traditional owners of this land. We also know that this land was never ceded and was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm coming from Wurundjeri country in Melbourne. Yeah, just acknowledge all the lands that you guys are on. Victoria is in a very unique place where it's developed treaty with our First Nations people, and we're looking forward to see how that progresses. Okay, I've been given 25 minutes, and it's a bit of a challenge to pack in what I need to. So if I'm a little bit scant on some information, always feel free to talk further about it. My past isn't that important. It's probably what's happened since the past that's most important. And yeah, so I was born in 63. My mother was certified at age 11 into Mont Park Psychiatric Hospital. So she spent most of her life in and out of and predominantly in a place called Mont Park Psychiatric Hospital. Back in those days, people that were well enough and connected to family used to go home on weekends and spend time with their family and the like. For my mother, who had no connection, actually used to take her own leave. So she would run away for weeks on end. And back in the 60s, it was very popular to go to dances. So she went to one, met a guy, obviously slept with him because I came about as a result of that. So 9 months later, the department said that she wasn't a fit person to be a mother. So she ran off with me. And after about 3 weeks, handed me into a police station saying that she can't do it. It's all too hard. So for the next 18, 19 years, I was made a ward of the state. Back in those days, they used to criminalise wardships. It was the only way to record information. So in children's courts, they would open up a criminal record sheet because we went through before a magistrate or a children's court magistrate. And it's on my record that I was no visible means of support and was made a ward of the state. So they opened up a criminal record for me at about 3 weeks of age. So I spent the next probably 18, 19 years living up to that. It's no point in just having the one little one-liner on the page. I sort of expanded it a bit. So I was described by one magistrate as a bit of a Huckleberry Finn, go on little adventures and get myself into strife. That's pretty much how I spent the first 18 years in and out of institutions, predominantly had some unsuccessful foster placements. My first foster parents were German, spoke fluent German in the house. They divorced after about a year. So I went back into care and then was fostered to another family. Unfortunately, by that stage, I could speak only German. So asking for a drink of water, asking for a range of needs, they didn't have a clue what I was talking about. So they became incredibly frustrated. I became incredibly frustrated and started to develop an anger problem. That anger problem carried me through to the next 25 odd years. That was my immediate response to things, that if I didn't feel I was understood or able to engage with people, I become incredibly angry. I'd just go from 0 to 100. That saw me get into a lot of strife around violence and a whole range of different things. So to say that my life was messy and unfortunate, it probably had an element of that, but I knew no different. So I was living the life that any other kid apparently lived. So I continued that until I got involved in some armed robberies that saw me go to Pentridge. Went to Pentridge and served 5 years. My anger got myself into a lot of trouble, so I spent a fair bit of time in H Division with Mark Brandon Reed and a few other colourful people. But soon after that, I sort of snapped out of it, and that was that I met my wife through a radio station, of all things. There used to be a thing in Melbourne back in the early 80s called 3KZ Matchmakers, and I happened to be listening to this one night, and this woman came on and said, "Hi, I'm Happy. I'm looking for an honest, sincere, genuine kind of guy." And I thought, that's a bit of me. I'm going to write her a letter. So I wrote her a letter. And about 5 weeks later, I got a response. So that relationship continued on for about 12 months, and I married in prison, which seems to a lot of people quite bizarre, and what stupidity would lead you to do that. For me, it was a catalyst for change, and for the first time in my life, I found someone more important than myself to care about. Up to that point, I was incredibly narcissistic. Everything I lived for, everything I did was about me. So to have someone new come into my life that I found more important than myself was truly life-changing. So when it came to to go for parole, it was successful, and I requested an interstate transfer, which was to go to New South Wales. I was incredibly well known because I'd grown up in all the orphanages. I knew people. I couldn't walk into a pub or anything like that without becoming connected with someone I knew from the past. So I moved to the north coast of New South Wales at a place called Grafton. Did some real work. Actually got my first job ever, which was at a roof truss company. If anybody knows anything about roof trusses, they're the things that connect your tiles to your roof. And they use very, very young timber. And what I mean by that is it's still very sappy. So after a week's work, your hands are black in this tar-like stuff that I wasn't accustomed to. I always kept good nails and good hands, and I really struggled with this stuff. So someone offered, my wife had become involved in a Pentecostal church, and someone offered me some transport, and I thought, you beauty, they've got me a car. I'm really impressed by this. So I went out to this night. They said they'll drop it around the next day. It turned out to be a push bike. Wasn't impressed, but appreciative all the same. So after about a number of weeks, I had a flat tire going across what they call the Bendy Bridge, which separates the north and the south of Grafton. I got a flat tire, and everything in me wanted to throw this bike over the bridge and go pinch a car to get to work. But no, I persevered. This was a new start and a new opportunity. So I did that and painfully got the bike repaired and all the rest of it. But anyway, to cut a long story short, the local TAFE college introduced a Cert 3 in youth work. And I thought this might be my ticket out of here. So I went and became a professional student. I did my Cert 3, my Cert 4, my diploma, all at TAFE. And I said to my wife, I think I'll just become a professional student. I haven't had to do much work. I'm pretty much just, putting my life on paper and getting distinctions for it. So I thought this was a good idea. Then they opened Bond University in Coffs Harbour, and I thought, oh, next step is to go to uni. So I signed up and off I went, and I think I lasted about 3 weeks. University seems to operate under a whole different language. I was getting, responses back for my, the biggest issue for me was referencing. I was talking about my life, so I just referenced it as myself. But that's not how you do it, apparently. So I found it all very complicated and very political, so I gave it away. So anyway, shortly after I returned to Melbourne, I found my father after 40 years and moved back to Melbourne and did some work. Pretty fortunate. I got work with the then Father Peter Norden, who was a Jesuit priest, is now some honorary clever person with RMIT or Melbourne Uni or something. So he does some sort of lecturing and the like, and being given some honorary title that, you know, sound like it come out of a cornflake packet, but he's done a lot of good work. But even still, yeah, we had a good relationship. So I went and worked for Connections, which is working with dual diagnosis clients, so drug and alcohol, mental health. Got involved in that a fair bit. It was community based, so it was about supporting these guys to get to appointments and work through some of the issues that they had. Um, I became tired of that very quickly, and then worked with other young people, which was White Lion was a mentoring program here in Victoria. It was kicked off by Glenn Manton, a former Carlton football captain, and a guy by the name of Mark Watt, and they teamed up and developed this mentoring program for young offenders, which operated out of Tirana Youth Training Centre, which is where I grew up. So it felt like I was sort of doing a full circle. And even though I walked away from my life with, severe depression, anxiety, and PTSD, apart from that, I sort of came out it pretty well. I guess they talk about schizophrenia being the hereditary and it skips generations. Well, I was an only child, so I'm glad that it sort of skipped me. Some people probably think that I am, but I'm not. I'm pretty comfortable that I'm not. But just ask me. So yeah, I had a difficult life, but it's not until I became older that some realities kicked in that life wasn't meant to be the way that it was. So I struggled a little bit with this reality and this false sense of reality. Um, One of the things that I did grow up with was a sense of hope. Hope has always been my best friend. I've used hope in just about every area of my life. But moving to the next stage of belief was always a challenge. Um, Moving back to Victoria and working where I did, I ended up working in youth for a number of years and then moved on to the adult correction system and spent the last 15 odd years working in prisons. Um, the thing that I enjoy, and please, I just need to interject here and say that I hope Sarah can be a timekeeper because if you get me on a roll, I'm hard to shut up. So please remind me how long I've got. Otherwise, you'll be here till my 12 o'clock or your 12 o'clock. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that. Um, one of my, it was very, very difficult to start because a lot of the guys that I grew up with didn't jump off the merry-go-round. So I was visiting guys that are now in their 40s and what have you, still caught up in the system. They've never got off. So, they've suffered chronic drug addiction, alcoholism, suffering kidney disease and liver disease. And I was pretty fortunate that one of the times that I was fostered out, I got a paper run delivering newspapers, and I used to stand on the corner of Matthew Flinders Hotel in Victoria and sell papers inside. And I used to hate the smell of alcohol in the carpet and these grumpy old men, saying, "I'll have a paper, mate," and breathing this disgusting smell of alcohol over me. So I never had an interest in alcohol and wasn't the best fan, although I'm covered in tattoos, I wasn't a real fan of needles. So, IV drug use was never my thing. My thing was greed. I just had a desire to have whatever I wanted when I wanted. Because growing up in the system, you were denied certain things, and you'd see kids in flash clothes and having flash toys, and And that sort of grew up with me, that I wanted the same. So up until my early 20s, everything, I'd never worked a day in my life and I just stole things off people with no real conscious or empathy or, at some stages I was called a psychopath because I was very insensitive of other people's feelings, whole range of different things. So, the interesting thing is that what gave me the authority to work in prisons is probably twofold. One, I went and got educated, which helped a little bit, but it sort of set up a framework to work in the space that we work in, and that is understanding why we do what we do, rather than I remember employing a lot of people in New South Wales. I wasn't interested if they were an armed robber, a car thief, or a drug addict. That didn't faze me. What I was interested in is how they came out of it, because that's what I'm asking them to do with the people they're working with, is show them a path out of the trauma, the trouble, and the criminality that they're currently involved in. So, in the end, I got a job with forensic care as a peer worker. Loved the job, thoroughly enjoyed the job. And I think the thing that interests me is it was about moving people. I worked in a unit which was, well, let's paint a picture first. Forensic care in Victoria, for those that don't know, have a designated number of units within a prison called Ravenhall, which is managed by GEO services. This is a separate, segregated section of the prison that has 4 units. It has a psychosocial rehab, which is where I worked, and it has a behavioural unit. It has a probably 2-stage units where people that are incredibly unwell, and for ones that are on the path of recovery. So the incredibly unwell ones are on the verge of going to Tom Assembly, which is a secure gazetted hospital here in Victoria called Tom Assembly. And back in my day of prisons, we used to have governor's pleasure. So what that would mean is that you were sent to prison with no end date, and it was up to the Department of Justice and whatever it was called back in those days, for Justice Health and the like, to make a determination whether someone's fit enough to go back into the community. So in the 90s and 2000s, we've now got Thomas Embling Hospital. So a lot of the guys that are incredibly unwell at Ravenhall will more than likely go across, because Ravenhall isn't a gazetted hospital, it's a prison. So people that are unwell are usually going across to Thomas Embling to get onto clozapine or the like. And that sort of medication needs monitoring, which they can't provide in a prison. So they go across to Thomas Embling for a period of weeks, get stabilised on a path of recovery, and then come back across. So I spent a number of years there, and I was very interested in the transition from custody to community, which is really, I don't know if enough money is being spent in that area. So we have guys that come to us in the last 6 months of their sentence, and it's about that transition from custody to community. So having a good understanding, and this is the slides that I wanted to take you through today, but I'm not very good at technology, so I should have sent them to Sarah in advance. But hey, I'm a lived experience consultant. I'm not a doctorate, so I wasn't meant to remember that sort of stuff. So yeah, it could be an opportunity further down the track to come back and share that. But basically, what it is it's got a number of steps that we look at, which is mental health recovery. So it's a course that helps people understand what the hell is going on in their head in a very casual, layman's terms. So that means that psychiatrists are barred from that room. They're not allowed to attend. And we get a lot more done. So what we do is we actually talk about those stages. We talk about what's the difference between Gen 1 and Gen 2 medication. Why are some people still on Gen 1? We talk about drug use in conjunction with their medication. We talk about becoming treatment intolerant. So, this idea where you're on medication while you're imprisoned, it has some yucky side effects, obesity. People will argue that, oh, the drug isn't obese, but it does actually stop you from having motivation to exercise and do a lot of range other things. So we talk about guys who get out of prison, say that this medication sucks. Got all these sucky side effects I don't like, dribbling on my pillow, all that sort of stuff. So what happens is, what do? Is that they go off their meds when they get out and don't touch them at all. And what happens is that they go and substitute that for illegal substances. And then what happens is they come back to prison because they've got to a point where they reoffend. And what they don't realise is that the constant backwards and throwing on this makes them treatment resistant to the point where the medication has no use. So you could find yourself in a constant state of psychosis simply because the drugs no longer are effective. So we encourage people that if you want to use, and it's not as a byproduct of going off your normal meds, but if it's a lifestyle choice, stay on your meds. So there's a lot of education around staying on your medication, consulting with your doctor, even to the point if you're on clozapine and because in Victoria there's no smoking, I think I'm 1 minute over, but I'll try and wrap it up real quick. Yeah, things like, if you're not smoking in prison in Victoria, you're not allowed to smoke in a Victorian prison. You get out, the first thing you do is grab for a gasper. Let your doctor know because your levels need to change to accommodate that. So it's a lot of practical, subtle stuff. We look at a whole range of different things, and that includes a lot of the peer worker's role is mainly is holding the hope for somebody until they're ready to hold it for themselves. So that's what's really important for these guys is having a buffhead like me in there encourages hope. Gee, mate, if you can do it, then maybe I can. So we look at courses that they could possibly do when they're out, just to increase their capacity and agency to have control. And we spend a lot of time making linkages into the community because so many prisoners are released with mental health conditions just into the community. They've got no connection to area mental health, where we look at triaging them, getting linkages and appointments, and really establishing a GP they feel comfortable with, and the referrals and stuff like that can go from there. But I probably waffled a little bit without having any real takeaways, but if one of the things that I can give you as a takeaway is about connecting the disconnected. We're talking about a group of people that are so alien, we wouldn't even know they exist. And our homelessness rates in Victoria are going through the roof. And most of the street sleepers in Victoria, in Melbourne, have a mental health condition. So the inability to manage their lives. In Victoria, and I think across Australia, there was a thing called the Burdekin Report in the 80s that said, let's deinstitutionalize the world. Let's put everybody into independent living with some support. But we have a section of our community that aren't capable of that. You know what I mean? If they had parents and connections, they'd still be living at home. But these people don't. So there's still a place for that sort of cottage type industry where people can live in a community that is safe for them to live. So basically my role now is I work at Victorian Legal Aid. I manage a lived experience advisory panel. that look at how we're doing remand in Victoria and capturing people with mental illness. How is that a seamless way through the system that is respectful, that is safe, and encourages people to have some agency. A lot of the people we work with don't even know what medication they're on. And it's a bit of indictment on them in the sense that on our society where people okay to let other people make decisions about their life, which, I hate. I like to see people, regardless of their mental state, being able to speak for themselves or have someone in their corner that can speak on their behalf. And it's not my opinion, it's what they want and what they want to see changed. So I'll leave it at that, and we can probably fill in the rest with questions. Otherwise, we'll be here for another 2 hours.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Glenn. I just love how you met your wife and how that was such a pivotal moment for you. It's such a
Still
beautiful,
together.
amazing. It's so
Mm.
gorgeous. You're doing such important work. So I'll invite everyone to pop their hands up if they have any questions, but
Sure.
I'll definitely use this opportunity to ask the first one.
Thank you.
So something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I'd love to hear your perspective on, is around building and sustaining the peer workforce. So what are your thoughts on some of the opportunities or challenges in recruiting and retaining peer workers?
Yeah, it's a good one because it sort of exploded pretty much, well, in Victoria since the Royal Commission a few years ago into mental health. And one of the recommendations was about the introduction of peer work, and it's exploded. And I think, it's got a phase of a bit of messiness at the moment because I also talk about lived and living experience.
Mm,
And living experience is very limited, I believe. I get challenged all the time around this, but my understanding is that really mental health is the only sector that I believe can have living experience. If you've got long enduring mental illness that is by Western standard not fixed or resolved, it's ongoing, that you have a level of capacity where you can operate as a peer worker. So under supervision and medication, you have a lot to contribute.
mm,
In my world, if in the justice system, living experience suggests that you're still committing crimes.
mm.
Okay, drug and alcohol suggests that in the living sphere, you're still using. Um, so I suppose that I struggle. I define those. They've each got their place, but don't mix them up, because you'll have a workforce that'll collapse. I
Mm,
think the main important thing is that even though for a lot of people their experience is based on their life experience, their qualification, sorry, is based on their life experience, we're struggling to find a dollar figure for that. And I
yeah.
think we underpay lived experience um, to advance anywhere. So
Hmm.
you have this pool of lived experience that are on about $38 a week. Sorry, $30 an hour. It's close. Yeah, and really, moving on with their life can be a bit of a challenge. So I think there's a lived experience. I think it's called. Well, I don't know. There's a peak body of Australia for lived experience,
Yeah.
but it has a strong mental health focus. So
Mm,
we've got an arena full of different sectors of peer, and I think we need to sort of each need their own peak body.
yeah. I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah,
Thanks, Glenn.
sure.
I'll hand over to Chris and then Alex, then Stuart, then Pascal.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you so much, Glenn, for sharing. That was really moving, and I've got a lot of hope listening to you, and a lot of belief as well in what you were doing. I'm curious about the lived experience work you're doing. Can you talk about some of the challenges you've run into heading up that lived experience committee and how you've overcome those.
Yeah, it's a living group, so we're still having challenges. There's it's about. I'm very, very fortunate. I'm with Victorian Legal Aid, so they are very, very good. And a lot of organisations feel like they need a lived experience element to sort of say we're a fully rounded, open organisation that is very inclusive and engaging. But VLA has really, from the head down to the cleaner, really engaged lived experience. So even though they're an advisory group, so the decision making still lies with the executive and the rest of it, they're really encouraged, and I'm talking about the members, how the organisation's adopted a lot of the advice that they've given. They're seeing it in reality on the floor being played out. So that encourages them even more to get involved and contribute. There are challenges where I thought I'd recruited a group of lived experience people. It turns out a couple of sort of borderline living, and I think it's a grace factor that you have to exercise. So none of this sort of, oh, you're reoffended or you're using substances again, you're off. We just put some love and safety around them, I guess, and how we can manage that. And in an organisation that is full of political correctness and all the rest of it, it's really, really good how they've come on board. And because we're looking at how can we do remand better for people coming into the system, it's very hands-on, and these guys are loving it. So I think when it comes to any lived experience group, it's important that you've got them for a purpose, not for the sake of just having them. And they're not idiots. So they know when they've just, invited to be a part of a talk fest or actually a working group. And as a working group, they're doing pretty awesome. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks so much, Chris. Great question. Over to you, Alex.
Hey, I guess I'm just kind of curious how you are sort of seeing, I guess, changes over time, working with people sort of getting out and their motivation and just their trajectory, like out of prison, as you see things like, like amphetamine use sort of really increase, and I guess sort of the nature of offending that's associated with amphetamine use and how that sort of, I guess affects like people's sentencing and stuff like that, and then how they sort of get back to the community when they've got sort of potentially much more severe or violent crimes and yeah.
I think it's a really good question because Victoria at the moment is going through this phase where crime, especially youth crime, is getting out of hand. And I think one of the issues that we've got is that we have a lot of academics in the room making decisions around stuff they really don't know a lot about. So, there's been so many times where we've actually squashed a round peg into a square hole and done some fillers around the corners. But bureaucrats don't see it that way. They use a formula that says, everything's evidence-based these days, but that means that you've got to be educated and done a thesis on it and had it pass through so many different, whatever committees you call, ethics and this, that, and the other, that sometimes adopting some lived experience stuff is really, really important. But we're pretty fortunate. We've still got a problem with heroin. So we've got a naltrexone program here in Victoria. So people are released with naltrexone that have a history of being a user. I don't know how that works because if you're given a naltrexone pack, you'd think you need another person, wouldn't you? Because if you go an OD, how do you self-admin? So I'm not quite sure, but they're educated on how to use the pack and all the rest of it. But maybe you've got to have a share buddy. I don't know.
Are the heroin crowd a bit older, or are they like sort of still
Yeah,
young?
they are. They are. They're. I'm not going to say they're all Vietnam vets. That's unfair, but they're that vintage, that vintage. But yeah, so it's an older crew, and also with it being sort of culturally discriminative, a lot of Vietnamese is still a drug of choice. So we're finding people that we're using a couple of grams before they come in think that they can use a couple of grams when they get out and they're ODing all over the place. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of education going on in prisons. Only because it's been a slight on them in regards to release prisoners ODing once they're out.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I definitely feel a bit more educated after having
Thanks.
listened to you speak.
That's
Thank you so
good.
much for sharing all of that. I got a million things I could ask. One that it just follows on from something you said is that there's an academic literature out there now about person first language. And so, like in our research group, we try to talk about people who've been incarcerated. But I saw that the title you chose for your presentation was From Offender to Redeemer. And I'm wondering if you can just reflect on your perspective on language. And, it might be there's one sort of language that you feel it's okay for you to use, but it's another thing for me or another person to use that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I can get away with crim and crook and all that sort of stuff. But I mean the language is we define people as ex-offender, prisoner, but we're trying to move away from that and move to things like people in prison or a person that's come out of prison, giving them some identity back. Um, but I think it's a really good question, and some of the stuff around language is I get corrected a lot, and I tend to use the word to dumb it down, but use language that people understand, and it's really important. I'm in constantly in meetings, and I deliberately do it, so they're quite conscious now to think about what they're saying is that I think I've added probably 20 minutes onto a meeting because I constantly ask them to explain what that is. And they get pissed off with it and sick of, telling the story. So, they'll look directly at me and say, this is what it means, which is good. But I think, there's so much stuff out there at the moment. And look, we talk about I think until I came to legal aid, I think I was using the term Indigenous. And then by the time I got to legal aid, it was First Nations. So it's always evolving. And I tend to ask leading questions to get the answer out of other people first and then adjust my sales to meet that need. But I think whether it's this or anything else, the underpinning factor, especially, I'm not quite sure who I'm talking to, but for workers, it's about relationship. And, I remember as a young youth worker, this young fellow, I was there because my intent was to go into this field having no one experience the life that I lived. So, I use word like redeemer and savior and all this sort of stuff. And he said, who the fuck are you to tell me how to live? And I thought, geez, he said something along the lines of, you've got to earn the right to speak into my life. Well, I felt like the size of an elf sitting on this stair because he was right. I've got people that I've just met. If I was to comment on the glasses they were wearing and say, oh, I don't really think they suit you, they've got every reason to be offended. But if it's someone that I've known for quite a while and I say, why you got them on your head? They don't they don't suit you. They can accept it better because we've established a relationship and they either tell me to pull my head in or take my advice. And I think that's the same with the people that we work with. That we've got to earn the right to speak into their life. And that's, look, it's no point in being a 60 or 70-year-old saying, hey, dude, what's going on, bro? Putting on they see straight through that. I think it's just genuineness. But language is a huge thing, and it can be a catalyst to engage in conversation, or it could, wipe you off the board. So yeah.
great response. And it's so right. It's just building trust and rapport and having
Yeah.
respect. It's just the foundation of providing meaningful support.
Mm.
That's awesome. Pascal, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for all your insights. It's quite
Thank you.
fabulous to hear your stories. Shall we go from language to connection? I was interested in that last part when you mentioned that you wanted to maintain connection with people released from prison. If you had a bit of potential to design a little program, how would you go to maintain connections, and how long would you need to feel like people are actually ready to be independent? People design programs of 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. What do you think of that?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
lots of variability, I'm sure, but overall,
Sure, sure. I think there's an old saying that says a good post-release plan is based on a good pre-release plan. So before someone gets out, it's about lining all the ducks up. Now, for about 90% of people that are being released from prison who are not returning to home, walk out homeless. So they've got nowhere to live. We have a total contradiction here where there's an oxymoron at work in the sense that you can't get parole unless you've got an address, and you can't get an address unless you've got parole. So, for the 21st century, we have people in prison for their biggest crime, which is homelessness. So if you're homeless, you don't qualify for parole. So that's very interesting. So lining up those ducks is really, really important. I love Silverwater. Now, Silverwater's got an annex. It's one of the unique prisons in Victoria that has pretty much a step-down program. So we've got one here called the Judy Lazarus Centre. And what that is long-term prisoners that are basically disconnected from the community go to this place where they can get access to the community through the day. So they can't work because they're not allowed to make money while in prison. So they can do volunteer work, so they can increase their skills and ability. They can go to a university or school to get educated. They can go and do community work, but they're still undergoing a prison sentence and they're waiting for an outcome on parole or their release date. What we need is that transitional part, which involves a degree of risk. We had them many, many years ago, but we didn't have social media. So if Johnny skipped one night, nobody would hear about it. But today it'll be all over the news within 20 minutes. So social media has got a huge part to play in how quick information's transferred. So what we need is those. Some prisons have this. I think it's 5 or 7 domains. So those domains are like housing, spirituality, education, community connectedness, sport and recreation. These 7 domains are things that we look at in like the holistic approach to someone getting released. We're not very good at it because what we do is we ask the truckie prison officer, who was a truck driver before he got a job as a prison officer, to become a quasi-social worker that now has a caseload of 30 prisoners or whatever, that they have to case manage. Their level of skill is quite low. And the complexity of putting this all together isn't that easy. So a lot of it doesn't happen. So what happens is, because prison is the way it is, all things are tried to be solved in the last week. So people are connected to Centrelink in the last week of their release. There's this desperate search for housing or accommodation, but what it ends up being is 2 nights in a motel and then given a swag and connected to one of those access points for housing. Mental health appointments are made okay. If someone's on methadone or bupe, there's a GP and a chemist they can connect them to. But there's so many gaps. So, I really believe that if we're serious about it, there needs to be transitional, because all our money is well, we have to go back to colonialism. And I think it was in Stuart's group, we talked about, someone made a comment and I thought, God, I think it might have been Stuart. He just came back from some conference or something that talked about, oh, no, it wasn't. Let me get it right. I don't want to put words in Stuart's mouth. We had a prison officer share with us a couple of months ago, and he talked about the uniqueness that, in particular, Victoria is still about punishment, right? So from colonial days, it's around punishment rather than reintegration. So we've got a huge banner which says, tough on crime, lock them away, all these sort of messages that talk about the punitive side of incarceration, which doesn't really look at the rehab. And that's the side that we need to, the reintegration part of it is the most important, and we're not very good at it. Love to go to a state where they're sort of, got a good hold of that. So as long as a state is in that punishment, punitive sort of headspace, they're not really interested in improving the well-being of other people.
Great question. Thank you. Well, if anyone else has got a question, please put your hand up. But I suppose building off of that, in terms of your perspective on prison officers and maybe what would be useful in terms to upskill and increase their capacity to support people while they're in prison. Yeah, what are your perspectives around how to assist, I guess?
I think the most basic one is, what do they say? Knowledge is power. So everyone needs to jump on board the education train and get educated, because I think that that's basically challenges people's thinking, the belief systems they've had. It's not until I went to school that I thought, that unconscious bias that we have. It wasn't until I went and started TAFE that I wish I had. I had 4 children, and none of the information that they talked about in the course was available to me as a parent. I went through 14 years of pain with my kids, but it could have been a lot easier if I could name some of the things that were happening, like the stages of childhood development. They're going to crawl at a particular time. They're going to walk at a particular time. But if they don't be too concerned. All this educating, developing children into adolescence, in a youth work course and what have you. There's heaps of information available to me if I want to be a youth worker, but not to me if I want to be a parent. So, I mean, a big time that I worked in one of the remand centres in the city during Rose Batty, who is well deserving of the award that she got, Australian of the Year. What came with that was a whole heap of new legislation around Australia. And for Victoria, what we were seeing, not condoning it for a minute, men need to learn to keep their hands and their mouths to themselves. But what was happening is that I was having interstate truck drivers, never been in trouble with the police before. However, he's on the no-dos and what have you, trying to get through a 24-hour shift in a truck, gets home and does a bit of ranting and raving and where's my dinner, bitch, and rah, 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 and all this sort of stuff. Totally inappropriate, but been going on for centuries. Mrs. Biddy next door, she's got the power to call up and be a third-party witness. Hello, police. I can hear a doozy of a blue going on next door. I think there's some domestic violence going on. Police can now come around and arrest him based on the third party's evidence, right? So he's got himself an intervention order that says that he can't live at home. And not only can't he live at home, he can't see his children. What do you mean I can't see my children? Well, it's part of the order. The children were present in the house when you're carrying on like a pork chop. Hang about. I wasn't yelling at my kids, I was yelling at my missus. And they say, oh, it doesn't matter, they were in the house. Fred don't get that. That doesn't compute with his brain. I'm having a blue with the missus and they're including the kids. So then he says, okay, all right. So it's his daughter's birthday 2 days later. He drops a present at the front door. He's in breach of the IVO. He's now in prison. First time in his life. Been an interstate truck driver, paid my taxes, never got a speeding ticket, but here I am in prison. So education is so important for everybody. We've got a group of men there that are doing what they call a men's behaviour program. I don't know what you've got in your state, but what we do is we shame and blame men to the point where they're crippled. We don't educate them. We tell them that they're wrong. Now, I'm not saying any of their behaviour is acceptable, but the method in how we're trying to educate men could be done a lot better. So I think I've just gone on a tangent and totally lost sight of what you asked, but
So
that's all you're getting.
knowledge is power. That is
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
absolutely true.
educate.
We have time for one more question. Alex,
Cool.
please go ahead.
Like when you say people make meaningful social connections when they get out, what happens there? And I guess like both people who maybe have something they can go back to, but when people, maybe don't really have like much of a social network, how do you see people succeed and where do they go wrong when they're trying to rebuild that?
Yeah, true. Good question. I think, part of my mantra is connecting the disconnected. So whatever social level, whatever interest level, what I'm searching for is a reason for people to want to be a part of our community. At the moment, that it's quite complex, but there's a social class in prison, right? So if you're a loser, if you're a junkie, if you're just a two-bit crook, you're at the bottom. You're a bottom feeder in the world of fish tanks in prison. Then you've got your home invaders, your high-end car thieves, blah blah blah. Then you've got your armed robberies. Then you've got your murderers. Then you've got your police killers. That's sort of the status in prison. So you can go back into prison and have a status, have an acknowledgement of who you are, and you're in a community that you may have been to a lot of the time. There's a saying that says you can either be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond. A lot of people struggle with being a small fish in a big pond. There's no connection. There's no what's happened with, especially in mental health sector, with the NDIS. What have we done? We've taken money from community-based services that operated like workshops and meeting places, and we've wrapped that up into individual care. So that becomes a package for the individual, but they've got nowhere to go. You know what I mean? Their behaviour, their illness, whole range of things stops them to go to a local art class, but they could do art at a mental health service that was community-based, drop-in centre type thing. So what we've done is we've isolated a whole community of people, and what we need to do is tap into their interests, learn a little bit more about them, and link them into whatever that might be. And a part of that might be getting them educated in something like intentional peer support programs, which operates out of the States. I've forgotten the two girls that do it, but and what that does is qualifies them to be a peer worker without going through all the drama of getting formally educated, and then they can be a part of something. So linking them in, doing talks to mental health hospitals and area mental health services. You just got to find what their strength is, and it's interesting. I don't know if I've got it on my desktop, probably not. I used to keep it on my desktop, but excuse me, there's an ad. It's in America and they do some of the clever stuff. Let's see if it's here. I'll take you 1 second. If not, I'll have to try and make it up, which I do a lot anyway. Where are we? Got so many things that's supposed to be important on my desktop now that everything's on there. No, okay. All right. So basically, what it is this guy is applying for a job in the newspaper. He's an ex-drug dealer. Ex-drug dealer looking for employment opportunities. Lots of transferable skills. A very good negotiator without anyone getting hurt. Manage, large amounts of money. And it just goes on. It talks about a drug dealer using those transferable skills into a mainstream employment. I've forgotten it, but it's incredibly funny. And that's what we have to draw on, that it's almost adult learning principles that you have, with adult learning principles, it's about filling the gap. If you're 50 years old, you've got lots of experiences, but what are you missing, a bit short on? They're the things that we fill. It's the same with people that we work in prisons or other places. What are you lacking? Like all those skills you've got, how can we utilize them? Taking an old Batman phrase, which is, if only they use their talents for good. So that's what we're trying to do, is not recreate somebody. And one of the important things is that I'm going to pinch another couple of minutes of your time because it's pretty important. People working in prisons, we've got two prisoners at the moment. We've got victims where it's everyone else's fault. Magistrates, not magistrates, lawyers and everybody else used to say, and social workers used to say, poor Glenn, Your Honour, he's had a horrible life. His mother died when he was very young. He went into institutions. His mother grew up in a psych hospital. Oh, Your Honour, he's had a just horrible, horrible life. Okay, that's the victim. And what happens is by the time, because I've got no identity, by the time I reach adolescence and a little bit older, I'm introducing myself that way. Hi, mate, my name's Glenn and I've had a horrible life, because I've got nothing else to hang my hat on, right? But at that point in your life where you're at a crossroads, you can either be a victim or a victor. The victor says, I've had a shit life, but I'm rising above it. And the victor always takes responsibility for what's going on for them. The victim's always got someone else to blame. So it's really, really important that if you're working with someone that says, I did some shitty things, or, I can't say how sorry I am, but I want to move on with my life and I want it to be productive, they're the people that you can work with. The victim will blame, if you get them a job and they don't turn up at work, it'll be the missus' fault because she didn't cut his lunch. It'll be the bus's fault because the bus was late. He takes no responsibility. Where the other guy will say, yeah, I'm sorry I'm late. I slept in a little bit and I was a bit slack and you had trouble getting here. So you really got to work out whether you're working with a victor or a victim.